So welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the fourth webinar series. So it's my pleasure to introduce Alna Janssen van Rensburg. She is a registered industrial psychologist and client development consultant at Thomas International. So she is responsible to manage a number of key clients, assisting with recruitment and creating and implementing training and development interventions to improve individual and team performance. So she also conducts our accreditation training of our psychometric assessments and oversees the psychology function in South Africa. Now, her passion is leadership development and team effectiveness coaching and workshops where the Thomas assessments are used to help teams understand each other better and to improve team synergy and ultimately their performance. So Alna, over to you.
Awesome. Thank you, Ronaldo, for the introduction. Welcome to everyone who's joining in this afternoon. It's always good to be with you guys, and hopefully you will be able to take something out of today's session. So what we are going to look at today is specifically recruiting for sales positions and making it very practical. So the idea is that after this session, you know exactly what are the traits to look out for when you are recruiting or even wanting to develop your current sales employees. So I thought let's just start with some interesting facts around sales. So the average sales turnover rate is 35%, and in comparison to average turnover rate for all other positions, that is quite low. For other industries, it tends to be at around 13%. Then 57% of sales representatives missed their sales target in 2017. Over $1 trillion are spent annually on sales forces. Only 13% of customers believes a salesperson can understand their needs, and 55% of people making their living in sales don't have the right skills to be successful, and continuous training gives you 50% higher net sales per employee. So I think the idea here is really to see that industry-wide, globally, people are struggling to find sales people with the right skill set, know how to develop them according to specific things that will actually advance their sales success as well. So we're going to start looking at different behavioral factors and also personality traits. And at Thomas International, we have profiled over 150,000 salespeople in more than 76 countries. And we are certain, or we are confident that we know what sales look like based on this research and based on what we saw with our clients and with our research. And this is research that has taken place over quite a few years. So it's not too recent. It is evolving as we sort of continually keep looking for clues and ideas of how to identify what is important for salespeople. So basically the research showed us 3 key traits that predict sales performance. So the first one is proactiveness. So proactiveness is around having active behavior, so actively driving and seeking results, but also that element of your confidence to stand up, how frank you are, standing up for your own beliefs and speaking up as well. Then we have resilience, and I think we are all familiar with the word resilience, but this is around how you are able to, first of all, remain calm under pressure. So in other words, being able to still be productive even though you experience a lot of pressures or stress in your environment. And then it also has an element of self-motivation, driving for results, persistence, not giving up, coming back even when you face difficulty or rejection. And then we have sales drive. So that would be a combination of your reaction to winning and losing, the degree to which you prefer certain sort of to the degree to which you prefer to receive positions of power and influence. And it also has this element of how proactive are you in dealing with difficult or threatening situations. So are you someone who sort of goes in head on without avoiding difficult situations? So we're going to start out and looking at behavioral requirements that fits into those traits that I just mentioned now. So I know most of you attended the previous 3 sessions as well. So you should be at a stage where you're quite familiar and comfortable with our PA assessment. So the A assessment is the behavioral assessment based on the DISC factors. But for the purpose of my next few slides, I just wanted to bring your attention to this specific slide. So just orientating you how we look at the graphs. So we know when you complete the assessment, you receive a report with certain graphs and scores on it, and you will have certain factors, as you can see in this image, that's above the middle line or the center line as we call it, and you will have certain factors that's below the center line. So that would be true for each and every single person. Your graph can't be valid without certain factors above and certain factors below. So the factors above is our working strengths, and the factors below would be our supporting factors, and they reinforce the working strengths. They are not weaknesses or developmental areas. So what we're going to look at is what of these behavioral traits are specifically then linking into what we saw is important for salespeople. So there are 2 main behavioral requirements that we saw through our research that is really important in sales or recruiting for sales. So the first one is that dominance above the middle line. So remember that dominant people have a very active approach towards their work environment. So they tend to actively fight and work to achieve results. They are quite assertive, competitive, driving, forceful, inquisitive, but also self-starters. So we see this dominance factor really making a big difference to sales success. The next one we look at is the steadiness factor below the middle line. The steadiness factor below the middle line also indicates someone who has a more active approach towards their work environment. These are the individuals who tend to be quite alert, demonstrative, mobile, restless. They seek out a variety. So the combination of the 2 works really well for sales, because both sort of reinforces that active and proactive approach to my work environment, but also the steadiness above the line indicates that this person isn't necessarily so set on having a lot of security. In other words, they are fine working for targets, for instance, because they tend to be less they don't really need apologies, they don't really need that steady income, knowing what they will deserve on a month-to-month basis. So the next one is I created a sort of an ideal profile for us, and this is really sort of the main profile that people look at when we look at sales positions. So the first one will include that influence factor above the middle line. So you're looking at people who's focused on other people, on relationships. They are communicative, friendly, influential, the networkers. They feel comfortable persuading other people. They are positive, verbal. So these people tend to sort of, or they are drawn to people. So for them to sit in front of someone and talk them through a presentation or through a sales speech, being quite comfortable to persuade them to see the way they see things. So that element of people and relationships really assists salespeople in building relationships then with clients, but also prospective clients. Then, as we saw in the previous slide, is the dominance factor. So that's remaining. And then the compliance factor below the middle line. So compliant below the middle line are people who usually seek a bit more of autonomy. They tend to be quite firm and independent, but very persistent. So that persistence is actually what we're looking for, persistent and stubborn and strong-willed to keep on fighting for what you want and to not give up, you know, after the first rejection you receive, and to constantly follow up, you know, with your salespeople. So research also shows that you need around 5 to 8 follow-ups with a prospective client before they actually sell or buy your product, and most salespeople give up after the first or second try. So that persistence really does make a big difference. And then being quite active and alert, like we saw in the previous slide, is also important. So this is a very sort of the most general, most focused on profile that we see people use for sales positions and where people tend to be successful in sales positions. So remember, this is only from a behavioral point of view. So we do regard this as very important, but when you combine it with a few different factors, it just adds a lot of value and in-depth knowledge about the candidate that you can work with. So there is a different profile in certain positions where we actually see people recruit for a sales position with that compliance factor above the middle line. So this would be in a environment where there's very detailed type of information the person needs to get through, or think of a financial environment where, you know, you have to be attentive to detail, you have to be quite accurate in terms of calculations you make for proposals, and to get people to actually know what they are buying from you. So the rest of the factors then remains also having still that influence, building relationships factor, the drive for results, and also the activity levels, the steadiness below the middle line. So this will really depend on what or how does your specific environment look like. And it might be different also for internal salespeople where they sort of work out of office and it's more on a virtual base or telephonic basis where they communicate with clients, as opposed to going out and meeting clients face to face. So the idea is to, again, same as what we do with each and every single other position, to really understand what is the exact needs for this position, and then based on that to recruit for the different factors. So if you are ever uncertain in terms of these sort of varieties that you can look out for, your Thomas consultant will always be available to assist you and to guide you in that process. Okay, so what you will also receive when a person completes a PPA assessment is a sales audit report. And this is very nice to also look at, just to get certain indications of this person's opening and communication styles, their closing style, their customer servicing. So this could also sort of be more important, say for instance, if it's an internal role or more of a farming role where you have to keep clients happy and sort of form a long-term relationship with them. Also their presentation style and their preference towards administration. So whenever someone completes a PPA, they don't have to do anything additional. It is just the additional report that you can draw and read of this person. Okay, so we're going to look at certain personality requirements for sales. So you are all also familiar with our Trade Emotional Intelligence questionnaire. You've seen it in the previous presentations as well. And most of you will also be aware of the value that this assessment adds and the depth of information you can get from a person when doing this assessment. So it really adds a big element, you know, to the presentation or to the person's results if you don't only look at behavior, but if you add that personality, sort of that deeper elements to it as well. So just a very brief recap then again. Our TQ assessment is a normative assessment, so you are being measured against a population group. So the scores here isn't a percentage of right and wrong answers, but rather a percentile of where you fall in comparison to this norm group. And we have 15 traits here. They are clustered as an overall well-being factor. We have an overall self-control factor. We have an overall emotionality and sociability factors. And then we have 2 independent facets, our adaptability and self-motivation. So if we look at the TQ traits that's important when you're recruiting for sales, it would be these 7 traits that you see here. So when we measure happiness, we look at someone's how content and satisfied they are with their current environment. So do they tend to sort of look at their environment and feel comfortable, content in what they have in that environment? And we find people with higher scores of happiness, so in other words, where it's towards a high average, or when the score is more than most other people, they tend to be more successful in sales positions because of that element of being content with whatever circumstances I have around me. Then we have the optimism trait. So optimism measures your view, how you view the future. Do you believe things will work out well? And we've also seen that people that tend to be more optimistic is better in sales positions. So, you know, seeing sort of any type of opportunity as, you know, an opportunity for them to drive results or to get something or to gain something out of the opportunity. So not overly focused on risks to an extent that they actually miss opportunities. Then we have emotion regulation. So very interesting, with emotion regulation, we actually measure how you remain calm, how you internally regulate your emotions. So in other words, when you experience a lot of emotions, are you able to still remain calm and focus on the task in front of you? Now, what we actually saw is people with lower levels of emotional regulation is actually successful in sales positions. So these are individuals that's very sort of affected by their emotions. So they tend to be very passionate, and that emotion showing through when they're trying to you know, make sales and build relationships with people. That emotion that comes through actually assists them to show the passion for, you know, their product or whatever they are selling. So that was quite interesting for me to see. Then we have emotion perception. So there we measure how you understand your own emotions, but also are you able to pick up on emotional cues of other people. So we also found that if emotion perception is more than most other people, that really supports salespeople. And I think it is quite clear that it is very important for a salesperson to be very attentive to people's emotions, picking up on their emotional cues, being able to read, okay, they have had enough, let's step back for a moment, or no, I can you know, push on a little bit harder, or I can follow up more or engage more with them. So really understanding the needs of the clients. So we saw in the facts that we did on the first slide, over 50% of people actually don't have confidence that salespeople understand their needs. And emotion perception is one thing that can help people with that element of really understanding the person's need. Then we have assertiveness, and assertiveness actually ties into proactive behavior as well. So when they've conducted all the research and analyzed the results, they saw that people who's more assertive than other people, you know, very willing to speak up, frank and forthright, that actually ties in or correlates well with proactive behavior in a workplace. Not keeping quiet, but very comfortable standing up for what you believe and how you see things. Then we have adaptability. So we measure someone's reaction to change, how open you are for change. And we also found that when adaptability is in a high average or more than most other people, that a person will be more likely to be successful in a sales position. And this is just, you know, being comfortable with a lot of change, constantly adapting to different needs of your clients or prospective clients, and being open for that. So big sort of challenge that we see with salespeople is they go into a client meeting or a prospect meeting and they have such a set idea of, you know, what they want to sell and how they want to sell it, and then they sort of again miss that opportunity to adapt to the client's needs. So that really supports them. And then lastly, we have self-motivation. So self-motivation more than most other people as well. So when you are really driven by an internal need to perform at your own optimum level, and this supports people because they also tend to persist even if they don't see the results. So, you know, even if they fail for one or two opportunities, they still keep on going because they drive themselves to always do their best. Also regardless of the external factor. Okay, so these are the main traits to look out when someone completes a TQ, and it can also be used for development. So if you currently already have salespeople employed and you know they are struggling and there's areas they might need to improve, then you can also have them complete a TQ assessment where we can see where the gaps are and you know, work on specific development based on those gaps, as opposed to sort of just guessing why they are not successful. Okay, then we have our high potential trait indicator. So I believe the people who attended our previous session, you saw some of the high potential trait indicator traits as well. So with this assessment, it is actually a leadership potential assessment, but it also is based on certain personality traits. And this assessment really made a big difference when we started to include it in our sales research. So initially we only focus on PPA and TQ and our general intelligence assessment, but then we sort of started to investigate, but what TQ traits can actually also tell us something and help us in developing and recruiting the right salespeople again. So very briefly, we just have conscientiousness, adjustment, curiosity, risk approach, ambiguity, acceptance, and competitiveness. Now, there are two main things we focus on when we look at the HPTI. The first one is someone's resilience. Now, through the research, we discovered that conscientiousness and adjustment are the two traits that really gives us a large indication of a person's resilience. So if you don't know yet, just as a very brief sort of overview again, the TQ scores are either low, moderate, optimal, or excessive. So, you know, low and excessive are again the two extremes. A moderate score would indicate, you know, fair levels of that trait and possibly a better opportunity to develop a person. And then optimal in this case is optimal levels in comparison to senior leadership. So you don't necessarily only need to look out for optimal traits. In general, when we look at moderate or optimal traits, that would give you an indication of someone's success. So conscientiousness it combines a few different things. So it's an organized approach to work, but it also has that element of how am I driving results? How much do I focus, you know, on motivating myself and keeping going again? And also not giving into impulses that other people tend to give into. And then we have adjustment, which also looks, I said it in the beginning when we talk about resilience, that measurement of can I remain calm under pressure or external events? Can I still be productive even if I experience a lot of pressure and a lot of stress in my work environment? And that is what we will see with the adjustment score. Then we look at that sales drive. So I already said an element of the sales drive will come into that dominance behavioral factor. And then the rest of the sales drive we really see from these three traits. So we have conscientiousness again, and I'm sure in the previous slides you would have gathered that conscientiousness is one of the biggest predictors of a person's success in any given role. And you can see in this specific instance, it forms part of resilience as well as sales drive. Then we also have competitiveness, which is your reaction to winning and losing, your preference for being sort of in a position of power and influence and being recognized for your achievements. And then we have risk approach, which is measuring your proactiveness towards difficult or threatening situations or even difficult conversations. So you really want to make sure the person won't shy away from having those difficult conversations, you know, directly asking people. So a very basic example is just asking people for a budget when you are in a sales position. A lot of people are uncomfortable with that, but that is actually really the starting point. And risk approach will give you these indicators then. Okay, so in terms of personality, you can see then there's two assessments, not only our TQ assessment, but also our HPTI assessment. And again, using both just adds a lot of sort of depth to what you see about a candidate and what it tells you about a candidate as well. So I think what we really try to encourage is to say, don't only focus on one element, and specifically don't only focus on behavior, because the behavioral preference could be there. It could be similar to a sales position, but if the real personality traits, you know, which is really what sort of grounds the person, if those elements aren't in place, then the person might still struggle. Whereas if we look at the big picture, we are so much more likely to really see, you know, what it is about or what we can expect from this person. Okay, and then we look at aptitude requirements for sales. So aptitude is a bit of a controversial topic when it comes to sales positions, because initially people predicted that aptitude is almost sort of the first thing you need to look at. So you do need people with high levels of, you know, learnability and trainability in order to be successful in sales positions. But we did find through further research that it actually depends on different types of positions, different types of industries as well. So what we're going to look at here is our general intelligence assessment. So again, this is a normative assessment, and you are being compared to a working population. So with a general intelligence assessment, we have 5 sub-assessments. So this is a different assessment to a personality or a behavioral assessment. So personality and behavioral are typically a questionnaire that you complete, where the general intelligence assessment, it's a timed assessment. So, you know, you are giving a practice round to make yourself familiar with the type of questions they are going to ask. And then based on that, you go into a timed assessment. So then you have 5 minutes and you complete as many questions as you can. With the GIA also, there's right and wrong answers. So you either have it right or wrong, whereas with personality and behavior, as you all know, you can't have a wrong personality or, you know, wrong behavior. So this is the general intelligence assessment is quite different to those assessments. So with a general intelligence assessment, what we measure in the 5 sub-assessments is, first of all, we look at someone's reasoning. Now, reasoning has a very a big correlation to problem solving. So are you able to actually take information, reason with it on your feet in order to solve a problem? So do you make correct conclusions or draw correct conclusions from information? And do you hold information in your short-term memory in order to solve problems? So thinking of, sitting in front of a prospective client, and you really sort of, again, we try to understand their needs and really understand where they come from and how we can assist them. In that moment, it is probably quite important for you to make the right conclusions, to understand correctly what the person is actually wanting from you. And that is something where reasoning can play a very big role. Then we have perceptual speed. So perceptual speed looks at, can you recognize details? So think of a very detailed sort of sheet and you have to work through it. Will you be able to identify similarities, check for error and accuracy, but also ignore irrelevant information? So can you actually look at the information and immediately determine these are the irrelevant information? I'm not going to spend time on this. I'm only going to focus on what is actually relevant for my purpose. Now, this perceptual speed is probably in most environments not as important for sales positions. Again, when it is a lot of detail someone needs to go through and you want them to be able to pick up on errors and inaccuracies, then it might become more important. But again, that's then going to be determined on your specific role in sales and your specific industry. Then number speed and accuracy measures a person's numerical ability. So can they manipulate numbers, concentrate when working on numbers? So basically any type of quantitative work. Now again, this might only be important in a financial or insurance type of environment where you do work with numbers, but think of an environment where there's sort of a set spreadsheet and you only have to populate it, then it might not be as important. Word meaning is based on the English language, so how you comprehend words, but also being able to identify similar meanings and understand written or spoken instruction. So again, this could become important where you sit in front of a client and you really need to comprehend what they are telling you. It could also be important when you work on tenders, for instance, when you have to understand the instructions they give you and really respond appropriately. On that point, perceptual speed is also something that could assist someone if they mainly focus on tenders and there's a lot of detail. You have to be attentive to detail, those type of things. And then we have spatial visualization. So that is how you manipulate images in your head. And this won't really be as important in a sales position. So what I said in the beginning when we started to talk about aptitude was sort of the concept of how important is it really. So what you will see with the overall score, and if I can just take you back one slide, overall score is the score in the middle. So that looks at overall, how do you compare to this population group? And that gives us an indication of someone's fluid intelligence, their concentration, their response to training, mental processing speed, and to know how and when to fast track potential. So these things could be very important when you are in an environment where there's constant change and this person will constantly be on training. They will need to respond to new trends and adapt to that. Then their response to training could actually be really important in the sales environment. Fluid intelligence gives us an indication of how quickly do you learn something. So that is sort of in your natural instance, do you learn quickly? Do you pick up new skills and abilities quickly? So this is the GIA. Again, very important to analyze your own environment and to ensure that you know what specifically will be important for your environment. So I would say rather focus on the personality traits as sort of your first go-to, because there's a lot of research that supports how the personality traits really support salespeople. And then as a second sort of consideration, look at the general intelligence as well. So very interesting. This was also based on our research, and we all know about the terms farmers and hunters, and their profiles can actually also be different, you know, different things that we look at. So what I found very interesting was that farmers actually demonstrated a much higher fluid intelligence than the average people. So this was interesting for me because farmers are the people who build the relationship and sort of ensure it's a long-term sale, or ongoing sale. And so this was quite interesting to say that fluid intelligence was actually much more applicable to the farmers. And then the hunters, you know, there's sort of a tendency to remain a bit more stable in their mood and their emotions, and also being able to change other people's emotions. So being able to influence and impact how other people perceive or see things around them as well. So that is a wrap up from what is important for sales. So we're going to open the floor now for questions or for comments. So you're so welcome. I did see throughout the presentation a few comments in the comment box. So if you do still have questions and you haven't asked them yet, then you can ask them now. So I'm quickly going to move there. Okay, so Susan asked, question, their schooling can teach basic skills but not personality. Low logic plus chaotic personality is a recipe for disaster. Fluid reasoning is key to be at least on the average range. It is not necessarily impacted by schooling, but could be test familiarity. Okay, so Susan, very important point there. You can't change someone's personality very easily. So yes, you can help them with certain coping mechanisms, but it is very important to recruit for that important traits that we know will impact. And then fluid reasoning, so that reasoning skill being at least same as most other people. So not necessarily much higher than the average score, but at least a fair level of reasoning could be quite important. So let me look at some of the other questions. Would the ideal profile still be the same if the market you are operating in is not very competitive, where a very persistent and possibly aggressively persistent approach isn't required, where a more diplomatic approach will get you the win? Absolutely, and I think that is when you can start looking at, you know, having higher levels of compliant factors where someone will look at, you know, look at the detail, but also be focused on being less aggressive in their approach, and also less persistent then. So it's always going to become applicable to your environment. So like I said in the beginning, always make sure that you actually really sit down and evaluate what will this person do on a day-to-day. Would you be able to develop a salesperson to have the ideal set of emotional traits? So you will definitely be able to develop someone, but they are who they are. So we don't necessarily say there's ideal personality traits. So yes, we do see certain traits that make people more successful. But essentially, if this person is really unsuited in the role, and the traits are much different to what actually usually makes people successful, then it should be a bit more difficult to develop, and that would possibly be also when you could consider their levels of learnability and trainability to see how they will respond to training before making a decision on your training approach. What if the candidate has a very low score on the GIA, but is a good match behavioral and personality-wise? And in that instance, I would definitely say place more value and more weight on the personality traits than the GIA. Like I said earlier, only focus on the GIA when you know it is a very fast-paced, fast sort of a responding environment. And I see the question I first asked was actually Susan's response. So thank you, Susan, for that. And I think this is also a response and not necessarily a question. Okay. Yeah, so what Kayla basically said is the person would need more time than most to get to know the work and more intense training, maybe more closely supervised. Okay, so remember, if they already have the experience, then the GIA won't necessarily make as big of an impact as opposed to when it is constantly new learning, new information that the person will receive. Okay, I don't see any other questions coming in. So that is then all from my side. We have our final recruitment session next week, same time, also Tuesday. And in this session, we are also going to look at a practical application, but specifically when recruiting for managers. So really looking at what is important for managers, what are the research showing that you should focus on when we look at managers. So I hope to see all of you back for next week's session. And yeah, thank you for listening to my voice and have a lovely afternoon. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, Elna. That was really informative. We will also be sending you a survey. If you can please just complete, we want to hear from you. We hope to see you there next week. Bye.